Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Livecast. I'm Richard Harris, here with Pastor Mark Cowart again tonight and our extremely special guests, David and Tim Barton. We are so excited to have you guys with us. It's always such an awesome honor, and I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be great.
Well, good to be with you tonight. We're excited to be here.
With you.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Well, Andrew wishes he could be with us tonight. He's been traveling a lot lately, but we're all really glad to have Pastor Mark, and it's going to be a great live cast. Before we get into this, let me just touch on a few things. First is it's an interactive live cast. If you watch us for long, you know that, but you can post questions and comments for David and Tim and Pastor Mark in the chat function there on the website, truthandliberty.net, or in the comment section on Facebook. Of course, we encourage you to watch on our website so that you don't get censored. But also wanted to mention tonight on our website, the resources page. Be sure to check that out. We've got so much material there. It's all designed to help you get informed, get equipped, and stand up and make a difference in the culture for Christ. So be sure to check that out. Also, wanted to mention some upcoming events that we have here at the ministry. Right around the corner is the Orlando Gospel Truth Seminar, where Andrew's going to be ministering along with Jeremy Pearsons, a great Bible teacher. That's February 11th through the 13th there in Orlando, and you won't want to miss that if you live in that area. Just find out more information on our website at awmi.net. That's the AWM website. And that very same weekend on Sunday, Valentine's Day, we're going to have Truth and Liberty Live with Andrew Womack in Naples, Florida at New Hope Ministries there with Pastor Grant Thigpen. We've got a special guest who's going to be joining us, and it's going to be a great evening as Andrew's going to be talking about the issues that matter in our day and in our culture and how the church needs to stand up and make a difference. And you ought to get your family and friends and make it out for that. You can find more information and register on our website at truthandliberty.net. I wanted to mention the Charis Men's Advanced, March 11th through the 13th, and Andrew will be ministering along with James J.B. Brown and Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy. So you've heard me talking about this now for a couple months, but you want to make it out for that, guys. It's for men only, ladies, sorry, but it is an awesome event. And J.B. Brown and Tony Dungy are great ministers of the gospel in their own right, and you will come away charged, refired, and ready to go. So register for that event on awmi.net. And then Easter is in April. I know that sounds like a ways off, but it's around the corner too. And we invite you to come and join us for the annual performance of God With Us, a moving production written by Elizabeth and Robert Murin. I tell you, it'll bring you to tears, it'll bring you to your feet, it'll remind you of what the Bible's all about. So join us for that, and you can register and get tickets on awmi.net. That's April 2nd through the 4th. So if you're not a subscriber here to Truth and Liberty, you need to be, because we're always sending out information and emails to keep you up to date, to let you know what's going on, and providing blog posts and all sorts of information. If you're not a subscriber, you can become one by clicking subscribe on our website in the upper right-hand corner. And if you do, you'll become eligible for our weekly product giveaway. And last week we gave away Andrew's book, Spirit, Soul, and Body. I want to congratulate Sheila Bryant for winning that book. It's an awesome book. And this week we're giving away Andrew's book, A Sure Foundation. A Sure Foundation. So in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, Jesus said, "Whoever hears my words and doeth them, I will liken him unto a man who built his house on a rock." The Word of God is the rock. It's a solid foundation. And this book goes into a lot of depth about that issue and how important and vital the Word is to our daily lives. So subscribe today and you'll be eligible for that free product. And also I want to just say thank you tonight to all of of our members, Truth and Liberty Coalition members. Thank you for your financial support. It's what enables us to do what we do here at Truth and Liberty. If you're not a member and you'd like to be, just go to our donate page on our website. You can sign up to make a recurring contribution of at least $5 per month, automatic withdrawal, and you will become a Truth and Liberty Coalition member, and we'll send you a free gift in the mail. Last thing I want to mention tonight is that if you need prayer, we have trained Spirit-filled, Word of God-filled prayer ministers standing by. Just call in 719-635-1111 and they will agree with you in prayer. So without further ado, I want to kick it over to Pastor Mark Cowart, who's going to give a little introduction for our amazing, famous guests tonight.
Well, it's, you are two of my favorite people, David and Tim Barton. And what's really exciting, my life changed, David, reading your 3-page article on the Black Robe Regiment, and that really was a turning point in my life in ministry. But we grew up, you used to have actually dark hair.
I did.
Many years ago. And
can I blame him for taking it away?
yeah. But when we showed our boys your CDs and DVD, or listened to the CDs and watched DVDs.
I appreciate the fact you said you weren't watching VHSs.
Well,
really
come
good.
to think of it, some of those were VHS. And I remember one of my sons said, "Wow, Dad, if we'd have known history was this exciting, we would have been interested in it." And it's really a story of faith when you look at America. And then, of course, we got the privilege to launch the Practical Government School. And really, that centers around you guys and being able to bring the real story of American history. And Richard, we got to serve together, and you got moved over to Truth and Liberty. Yeah. And it's just been an awesome journey. But you've been called America's historian, and it's just amazing. I always tell people, when I listen to David Barton, it's the proverbial drinking out of the fire hydrant. And, one of the things I hoped we could talk about tonight, you preached a message 2 Sundays ago called Run to the Roar. And I'm on my second time, getting ready to do my 3rd time through that. I was telling the church about it, posted it on our website. I was sending it to as many people as I could think of. And then I said, I'm just going to tell the church. So we posted it on our website. And I said, everybody needs to hear this. And it had a very, very important message in it. Could you give us a synopsis of what that Run to the Roar is?
Yeah, I can easily do that. On Run to the Roar, if you look in the Bible, one thing the Bible talks about is animals, and one animal that it uses very often is the lion. A lot of verses we know about in the Bible and the lion. Interesting, when you study the lion in nature, several things about them. Lions kind of run in what we call a pride, male and females. And they live out in savannas in Africa, really wide kind of plain areas. And it's interesting the way they function hunt, because everybody in the pride has their own function. What the male does is very different from what the female does. The male has that large mane. He is ferocious looking. He is very fearsome. He is called the king of beasts for a reason. There's really no predator coming after him. And so he's kind of at the top of the food chain in that sense. But he makes all the noise. The female lions don't make that same kind of noise. And they're the more dangerous ones. They're the hunters. They're the ones that do the killing for all the pride, so they have something to eat. And the way it works is that on that savanna, when that male lion roars, you can hear that roar up to 5 miles off. Now, I will say, I've yelled at my kids. Nobody heard me 5 miles off. You can't hear me next door, most people, So imagine 5 miles off. What happens is, when that starts, the male will be at one end of the savanna, the females are at the other end of the savanna. When they all get in place, he roars. Everybody runs away from the roar because that's fearsome. They run down here where the silent people are, and they run right into danger. The safe spot when you hear the roar is to run to the roar. He's much slower than the other animals are. Now, if you get mixed with him, you're going to be in trouble. But you can outrun him a lot easier than you can outrun the females. He's a lot less dangerous over distance than they are. So when you hear a roar, you run to it. So when we have Bible verses, 1 Peter 5, Satan is as a roaring lion. Don't run away from the sound of battle. You want to head toward it. That's a safe place to be. The same thing we're told in Proverbs 28 that the righteous are bold as a lion. We should be the one doing the roaring, not running away from it, not cowering and getting out quiet. When you look in the book of Job, first 37 chapters, Job and his friends are having this philosophy debate, and then God shows up in chapter 38. He says, you guys think you know so much? Did you do this or this? And he goes through all these lessons of nature. And he gets in chapter 39 to the war horse. He said, I made the war horse. When it hears the sound of battle, it runs for the sound. It pauses. It can't wait to get in the battle. There's just so many verses that tell us to run to the roar. And now at a time when we've seen so much change already in just a week or two of the new administration, it's like people are wanting to hunker down and wanting to find a safe place. No. Now is when you run to the roar. That is the safest thing to do, the safest place to be. So that, in essence, is a little bit about it. There's a whole lot more to it, but that's the highlight. Wow.
And it riveted me, David, because I'm kind of that bottom line person. What's the root? What can we do right now? And you basically pointed out that, yes, it's important what goes on in Washington, D.C., federal levels, but we've got to start winning battles at the local levels. Something that just shocked me, you know, I know you're good friends with Barna, George Barna, Barna Research. In the last 20 years, you pointed out in that message that we've had a surge of megachurches, but on the same hand, in the last 20 years, we've had a decline of Christians. And we think bigger is better. And so a lot of times people are thinking, you know, those big high-level offices. But what I heard you say is we've got to start winning local battles across the nation, school boards and city councils and what goes on. Can you kind of encapsulate what we need to do with everything that we're seeing? Because there's a lot of things we could talk about tonight.
Yeah, one of the challenges that, I mean, you guys know, it's one of the things that Harris is so great at helping equip people, making them disciples, study God's Word, apply God's Word, and do it. Much of culture is just not there. And as you mentioned the statistics, it used to be that 85% of Americans self-identified as Christians. Now it's only 65% that self-identify. And we could argue if even 65% of Americans really believe in God, following His Word, because I don't think they are, but that's even self-identify. And yet in the midst of that, Pastor Mark, as you're pointing out, we've seen an explosion of mega churches. One of the things that is, as much as we have some friends who are pastors who lead these massive churches, and I'm not trying to be overly critical, but when Jesus said go make disciples, one thing that mega churches cannot do as well is make disciples. That's just something that kind of falls by the wayside. And part of it is because the mentality is when you are in a group of people, and if there are hundreds and hundreds or even thousands, it's easy to think, well, I'm just going to show up in church and I'm going to let the pastor speak to me and I'm going to let other people go do the jobs that need to be done. It's a lot different if it's Jesus and the 12 disciples and He says, hey, you guys need to take care of this. There's not as many people you can point to and say, well, you should do that. It's easy to push off that responsibility on somebody else, and this is one of the challenges that we have right now. The reason we are where we are is because for far too long, Christians have not engaged in culture being the salt and light. We've been content to have a light inside of us, but far too often we hide that under the bushel, which we know Matthew 5, we're not supposed to do. It's supposed to go up on top of the hill. Everybody can see it from everywhere around. And this is something where if we're going to make a difference in culture, as Dad, you pointed out, when the devil seeks like a roaring lion or goes around like a roaring lion seeking those he may devour, the reality is there are things in life that can be very fearful. And there's never this problem. Obviously, we know God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. Check. But there's never a problem with saying something scary, but it's how we respond in that moment. And the natural response, and even we've seen it in the church for so long, is when something happens, we want to let somebody else be the problem solver. God created us to be the problem solver, not to let somebody else do that. And this is one of the challenges that, especially 2 weeks ago, that message brought out. It's part of what actually will be challenging the School of Practical Government here, those students all week while we're here at Harris, and I know even chapel on Friday. But this is the reality of the challenge for Christians in America is we have come to the place where I really believe there's some winnowing happening, right? Where God's kind of separating some wheat and chaff even in the church in America because it's been very comfortable and casual to be a Christian in America. And it really hasn't cost us much to be a Christian in America because our rights were always politically protected. There was always the majority. It was the norm. Well, now that we're in a place where you're going to be called hateful or bigoted for believing the Word of God or what civilizations have believed for literally thousands of years, that there were two basic genders, male and female, and marriage was created for a man and a woman. Now, if you believe those things, you will be labeled as racist or whatever, homophobic, transphobic. Like they're going to throw everything at you. And this is where now we're going to see if we're going to have the courage and boldness to stand up and do something. And I love one of the things you point out in this talk, and we actually talked about it many times, even before this talk, but every year, and I know you guys do this too, we read through the Bible every year. We started this when we were kids. We used to have a one-year Bible, and every morning at breakfast, we'd pull out the one-year Bible. And it used to be when we first got old enough that we actually could start reading those words. It was like this treat, like, I want to read now. And we fought over reading the Bible, which is a really cool fight to have. Wow. Who gets to read the Bible, right? But we've read the Bible our whole life, and it's amazing how God continually shows you things. And you're like, I've read that verse how many times? I could quote that verse, and I just totally missed this part. But it's interesting looking at Revelation. When the Bible talks about the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, and it goes through the list of people that are going to be there, we are now in a place that we are seeing the beginning of that verse in a different light than we've ever seen it before.
Yeah, cowards, I think, is on the list.
Well, it's interesting because who goes to the lake? It says murderers and adulterers and sorcerers and those that do evil deeds and all these bad people. But up top, the first thing it says is fearful and cowards. Mm-hmm. And so many of those are there for what they did. These guys are here for what they didn't do. They didn't have backbone. They didn't stand up. They didn't resist. They just, I'm afraid of getting involved. No, I don't want people coming after me. Oh, if I say that on my social media, it's going to blow up. So this fearful and cowards thing is the top of the list of God says, these are the people who's not going to be in heaven with me. And that's something we got to deal with. And part of it, too, even going back to what you said, I'm going to give a couple of examples on the local area, because I have been part for the last 8 to 10 years of watching Christians, churches, organizations praying for revival. Mm-hmm. America needs revival. The way the election went, I've really been hearing it now. Unless we have revival, we can't be saved. It's, there's a lot of pessimism out there. Interesting thing about revival is we look at things like George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, how that turned the nation around. And if it wasn't for the Great Awakening, we wouldn't be here today, and that's true. George Whitefield preached for 34 years, preached at least 18,000 different sermons. That's really impressive, all over the nation. That's the point that we shouldn't be paying attention to. I mean, that's important, but what we should look at is the fact that 80% of all Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, the fact that you did not have the high-tech media back then, the fact that he didn't have stadiums and arenas that would hold 80, 60, 400,000, whatever it is, people, he didn't have these big crowds. What does that mean? That meant he went to that many small communities. He went to small communities and had a revival in that community. This one only had 300 people. This had 5,000 people. This one had 480. Whatever it was, he's in that many communities. That's what created a national revival, is you had so many local revivals that it turns into a national revival. Same thing, we won the American War for Independence, not because George Washington did a great job, which he did, but it's because he didn't have to fight all that many battles. So many of the battles were fought by the local guys at the local level. He stepped in with national leadership and helped fill in the gaps where that we couldn't. But the Battle of Lexington, local guys. The Battle of Concord, it's our community. We'll take care of it. Battle of the Road to Boston, the Battle of Bunker. We were just reading this week about the Battle of Great Bridge in Virginia. Just a bunch of local guys held off the British there, completely changed Virginia because of that local battle. You have Kings Mountain, you have Cowpens. Yeah, George Washington did some really big things, but we really won the American War for Independence because we were winning the local battles. And when we see the stuff that's going to be coming down, and it's already started from the Federal Department of Education, we're saying, oh, what can we do? What you can do is make sure you own your local school board, and you win that battle at the local school board. And then what the Federal Department of Education does, that's irrelevant. We own our school board. And if we own all the school boards, we really don't care what the Federal Department of Education does. So our battle is not at the federal level, which is where all the national media focuses. It's where we think. Our battle is at the local level. And just, if you need to turn off the national stuff, look at the local stuff. That's what you got to focus on.
Now, in this last election, people are, kind of dejected about what happened and so forth, but there's actually some pretty good news out of it when you start looking at the number of seats that were picked up in the U.S. House and the gains that conservatives made in state legislatures across the country. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, we actually, I think the number before this election was 26 states were controlled Republican majority. Now it's up to 29. After this election, that 29 states have a Republican majority. Looking in U.S. Congress, there were dozens of pro-life members of Congress that were elected on the Republican side. And I'm saying Republican not to be overly political in this situation. It just happens to be that right now, if you believe that an unborn life is actually an unborn life, you're going to be Republican, at least on the federal level. There's very few Democrats that are still there.
We do not know of a single federal congressman right now who's Democrat who's also pro-life. There was one, Dan Lipinski. The Democrats took him out in the primary so that there's not even a federal Democrat left that doesn't believe you should have abortion right up to the time of birth, and many of them after birth, infanticide. So back to your point.
So as we're pointing out that Republicans have made gains, it's not to just say that we're yay Republicans, because the reality is, and this is one of the things that people have I've seen so much on internet, social media, where people that just defend Trump, you've made Trump your God. No. I the whole time Trump was in office, have acknowledged Trump is certainly not a perfect man. Fortunately, we know that God uses imperfect people all the time, so that's okay. But the reality is, the reason that we were big supporters of Trump wasn't because of who he was as a person, rather his policies. Yep. Because as a Christian, I'm always going to be pro-life. I'm always going to be pro-marriage. I'm always going to be pro-Israel. I'm always going to be pro-religious liberty. We have never had a president, ever, in the history of our nation that was more pro-life, was more pro-Israel or pro-religious liberty since Donald Trump. Now, we might make the argument that really you're only looking since 1973 for pro-life, because that's when the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, federally, this is now accepted. You can have abortion in the nation. So really, we're looking at the last 50 years or so of presidents. And you might could argue the same thing with Israel, because Israel has only become a nation more recently, right? You're looking in the mid-1900s. With all that being said, as a Christian, I know where I need to stand because of what the Bible teaches about righteousness. And we know as Christians, we're supposed to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. We know that righteousness exalts a nation. This is not about a political party. And we would love for the day to come when there is a battle between the Republicans and the Democrats, or whatever party names you want to give them, about which one is doing a better job of following the Bible and being more godly and biblical. That will be an awesome place to come to. Yeah. It's just that right now, there is one side of the aisle, politically speaking, that is much more in favor of biblical principles and righteousness. So with that being said, there were some major gains that were made that are things that, considering the national landscape and even now what we're seeing Biden do with some of these executive orders and undoing so much of what Trump did, there's a lot of reason that we should be very prayerful. And I'm careful not to say fearful or concerned or discouraged, because we shouldn't be as Christians, because we know God's going to win in the end, but we also know that we need to play a part in that. And one thing we can do every single day is pray for what is going on. Pray that God gets a hold of Biden, that God wakens people up, that God takes the blinders off Christians' eyes and they become more involved. There's a lot of stuff we can pray for, but there still was a lot of really good things that did happen.
You know, and to go to that, it's not that we're Trump supporters because it's Trump. What we are is we're supporters of certain policies, as Tim said. And so I've just made a list as I was driving in, just in 5 minutes, of things that happened in the last 5 days. And so reversed all the pro-life orders, executive orders are gone. And so all the pro-life stuff we had is gone.
That includes funding of Planned Parenthood, right?
Funding of Planned Parenthood was back on the table.
Yeah, so the Mexico City policy, which it used to be that federal funds could not be used to promote abortions in other nations, or that other nations, we said you don't have to provide abortions to get this coverage, which actually used to be part of the condition, is that if we're going to give this to you, you have to provide abortions. And so that was a contingency for those nations. Trump said, no, we're not doing that, or people in his administration said we shouldn't be doing that. Trump signed that executive order. Joe Biden has reversed with his own executive order, saying we're going back to the Mexico City policy. We are going to fund Planned Parenthood. We are going to fund abortions in other nations. So that has changed.
Yeah, so all of that. Also, he has reversed all the conscience protection that was
Joe Biden is who you're speaking of.
Joe Biden has given executive orders reversing all the conscience protection. So it used to be that Little Sister to the Poor didn't have to do abortion kind of funding. 3 cases of the Supreme Court, we're back to that thing where that they don't have that exception. The same with adoptions. A lot of Christian organizations felt like adoptions were better when you have a man and a woman at home. Not anymore. They don't have protection any longer. So all the conscience protection is off. If you feel motivated by your faith, it has to give way to the new executive orders. At least that's what they claim. He's supporting a divided Israel. We've gone a long time trying to get Israel united. They've had peace.
Meaning a two-state solution.
Two-state solution, which is divide Israel, let Israel give away part of itself. It's already a tiny nation.
You're saying let Israel. This is not a let Israel That's encouragement. Right. This is them saying, nope, you need to give this portion of land to the Palestinians. You guys are bad in what you do. There was discussion that, hey, we're going to let Israel kind of keep some Jerusalem. The U.S. Embassy might stay because this is up in the air. He's discussed, or at least people in his administration have discussed, moving the embassy back out of Jerusalem because that might offend people. And also keep in mind, when President Trump got elected, there were so many voices saying if President Trump does what he is suggesting to do in Israel, it will cause so much unrest in the Middle East. And yet, probably if you've been paying attention to Truth and Liberty, you've heard about the Abraham Accords. You've heard about some of the really positive things happening where Israel now has more compacts, more peace agreements with nations in the Middle East than in their entire history as a nation. That happened because of the Trump administration.
Yeah, there are 5 nations that have signed the accords and 10 more that say they're going to. So you're talking 15 of the 26 Islamic nations in the Middle East are now making peace with Israel, and they want to reverse that.
And Joe Biden saying he wants to change that policy and make Israel go back to a 2-state solution.
And so also another executive order, no sex-specific bathrooms. So if you think you're male, you don't know what you're talking about. If I think I'm male, yeah, so we don't get the choice of sex-specific bathrooms.
And actually, more specifically, it is what you think.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
If you think, then that's fine. That's all that matters. No, biology no longer matters under this executive order. So if there was, for example, a student who said, a male student who said, I think I'm a girl, I feel like a girl, even if they have not changed their clothes, changed their attitude or behavior, they can now go into the girls' restroom, the girls' locker room, and the girls' showers under the Biden executive order. And this is now federally protected. Now, certainly, if this is something happening on the local level, there will be lawsuits. This will work its way through the court system. But this was something with a different administration. That was not something that students were given the opportunity to self-identify on any given day to be what they want.
And this is for any schools receiving federal funds, right?
Any schools receiving, well, it's going to be more than that because they're working on the Equality Act, and they will be able to pass and sign that.
Right.
That Equality Act.
Yeah.
But right now, yes.
Right now.
Right now, it's
right now, and it's, you know, they have it on steroids coming. Also, he repealed the 1776 Commission on Patriotic Education. So we're not going to have this patriotic education anymore. We got to get that gone. We already have a problem with that anyway. And so instead of learning more about our history, we're going to learn less about it. What's happened even with illegals, the Supreme Court had come down and upheld Trump's position that when we're doing the census count, we're not going to count illegals because census count means of how we divide congressmen. And if you count all the illegals, then what happens is the states that have a lot of illegals, sanctuary kind of states like California, suddenly it looks like they've got another extra 3 million people, so they get a bunch of extra congressmen. Well, now you've got a lot more power in Congress for states that are violating the law. And so that had been stopped under Trump, but now this week, President Biden has announced, no, we're going back to counting all the illegals in the census. And by the way, they ought to be able to vote too. Which, I mean, just the logic, why don't we just send ballots to every nation in the world, 193 nations? Why do you have to be legal? Let's send them to Russia and let Russia vote. It's crazy to think that citizenship doesn't mean anything and that it has nothing to do with whether you can vote and decide the direction of your nation. We're letting people who are not from our nation decide where our nation. Doesn't even make sense logically. Biblically, it makes no sense out of Leviticus 19.
Well, and this is where the point you're making is it was not about us supporting a man, Donald Trump.
That's right.
It was about policies.
That's right.
And anytime
and there's a lot more, by the way.
Anytime you have a leader, the leader's going to have policies that will either reflect godliness or reflect not godliness, right? Whether it's sinfulness, wickedness, flesh, human nature, whatever you want to call it. This is where we have to pay attention. We're not choosing a personality merely. We're choosing policies. And policies, I would argue, are always more important than somebody's personality. It's very, very possible that many of you watching maybe love Donald Trump's personality because you were finally excited to have somebody stand up and tell people what somebody actually thought about them. Maybe you loved it. Maybe you're like many Americans who said, you know what, his personality, I can handle it. Or some people said, no, it just flat out bothers me. That's fine. Because you're not electing a pastor to the president of the United States. Now, it might be kind of cool on some level, depending on the passter.
Yeah,
I'm not sure every pastor would follow
There's
the
a lot
Bible
of pastors
really
we wouldn't want to be president of the United States.
No.
But yes, Pastor Mark, I will vote for you, no problem. But it's policies that make the difference. And this is where I'm seeing now a lot of Christians get a lot of pushback from people saying, well, as you're defending Trump, you've made Trump your God. This has nothing to do with making Trump a god, because I can quickly recognize and point out a lot of his flawed humanity, a lot of his indiscretions, a lot of his fleshly moments, even while he was president. That doesn't change the fact when the Bible says righteousness exalts a nation. I would argue the righteousness that exalts a nation is not merely the Bible study habits of the leader. It is the policies that leader puts in place, because if you have a nation that says we are going to murder all babies 2 years and under, and you have a nation that says we are going to protect life from commencement to its close, right, from beginning to end, we will protect all life. One of those nations God will bless and one God won't. And it won't matter how much either one of those leaders of that nation reads the Bible personally. It is the policies that nation enacts that God can bless or curse those policies.
One other thing I would add to that is we saw after the election numbers showing that up to 25% of people voted on the basis of personality, not on the basis of policy. That they thought, I like Biden's personality a whole lot more than I like Trump's. We'll see how you like the policies that go with it. Because as Tim said, it's not about personalities, it's about policies. Now, as he also said, we're getting attacked because you love Trump and you're a cult for Trump. What happens is you cannot back away from engaging in the debate. This is where you run to the roar. And if they want to call me a homophobe, I say, oh, so you're a heterophobe, are you? Just turn it back in the other direction. And so you've got this bias against heterosexual people. You can't disengage from the debate just because they're being mean or just because they're saying things about you. If people around us don't hear two sides, if they don't hear some truth somewhere, all they're going to hear is the lies, and they'll start believing the lies. Mm-hmm. So this is where you don't back up. You have to have a voice. You have to run to the roar. And if that means it's a war going on and you're the war horse, all right, get me in there. I want to engage in this debate. We got to have that mentality. You have to be offensive minded.
You know, I want to make sure we get to one other thing, because I heard you guys, heard you on Glenn Beck the other day talking about this, David, and I think this is a huge issue that not enough people are talking about right now, but it's the Great Global Reset.
Yes.
Can you talk to our viewers about what is that and why do we need to be concerned about it?
What happens with the Great Global Reset, this is something that's been in play for a little while. COVID has been a reason for them to move it forward. Let me kind of explain what it is. If you know the various economic systems, you have socialism. In addition to socialism, you have the free market. Those are the two big ones in the world right now. You have other command economies, but a command economy means that the government runs the economy. And in those economies, statistically speaking, prosperity is much lower individually and nationally, and freedom is way down. When you have competitive free market, you have higher income per capita per person, you have greater achievement, and you have much more freedom. So what's happened is China had been a command economy, and they've been pounded economically. So what they've done in the last 10 to 15 years is move to a modified free market economy where they're making more money, but they're using it for bad things. So it's kind of you could call it communistic socialism or socialistic free market or communistic free market. It's this blend. And so what it means is government is taking control of the free market and will let you, instead of you get to keep all your profits you might make, we're going to let you keep 20%. We'll take the other 80%. So there's still some incentive for you to produce, and they get more money, but it goes to the government. So what's happened is in this global mentality, world leaders, the World Economic Forum, and this is the leaders of the world, this is an international, multinational thing with dozens and scores of nations that are with it. They see COVID as a way to reset the economy. Because of COVID, we the governors can step in, we the president can step in and say, hey, we're going to have to shut your business down a little more often, and you're going to have a few more regulations than you've been having, and you're going to have to start doing this, and here's what your production is. And so we see it all over the world at this point.
And really, COVID was the opportunity for the implementation of the strategy
that's
we
right.
already had in place.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because
right.
the plan always was that we want to be able to come in and, I mean, essentially, it's like the Tower of Babel, right? Where we're all going to speak the same language, we're all going to have the same finances, and there won't be personal control of finances because the government gets to dictate. And actually, even in this situation, there's going to be debates about does private property even exist?
That's right.
Because there might be just a loan to you from the federal government, but really the government owns all the property. And so everybody's going to speak the same language, have the same money. You're going to go to a online currency, right? So there won't be physical cash on hand. All of these things that allow the government to manipulate and control. And that also means if somebody steps out of line, they can drain their accounts, they can take away their business, their property, whatever else. So it gives the government the opportunity ultimately to be the tyrant dictator they want to be. And this has been talked about for literally decades. And the question always was, how are we ever going to be able to implement this? Because there has to be some scenario that all the people are crying out to government for help. And so, and literally, just last year, there was these conversations at the World Economic Forum. And then when COVID happened, they said this might be a chance to start implementing that strategy to make us all be one nation.
And they've had a motto that goes with this is we need to build back better. We need to build the economy back better. It'll be better if we control it. And so with the World Bank and other things, build back better. And COVID was that opportunity. And so you've heard Trudeau up in Canada say, time to build back better. You've heard Biden have that as a campaign slogan, time to build back better. You've heard that from the chancellor in Germany. You've heard it out of Italy. You've heard all these world leaders using the same slogan. Where'd that come from? All you have to do is go to this is not conspiracy. I am not a believer in conspiracies. I'm a huge believer in Isaiah 8, verses 11 through 13. Oh, thank you. I like the click pen. Sorry. Isaiah. Thanks, Tim. My adult supervision. In Isaiah 8, 11, verses 11 through 13, in the King James, it says, don't call conspiracy everything they call conspiracy. Don't fear what they fear. Don't dread what they dread. And so whether it's satellites over Italy or whether it's QAnon or what, don't get caught in conspiracies. Having said that, if you go to the World Economic Forum website, on their page, they tell, it's not a conspiracy. They tell you exactly what's going on and what's happening. And so what happens with this global reset type of thing is indeed, they've already got BlackRock Investments that has $21, $27 trillion a year in investments. And they're saying, hey, we'll invest in your business, but you're going to have to start doing these things economically. And so there's a lot of businesses that want the investment, want to be able to expand, but they're giving up their freedoms, they're giving up their liberties, they're moving into a command economy, modified command economy, and that's what the Great Reset is.
You know, last time y'all were on, you talked about your new book, and this is amazing, The American Story. And one thing about America, David, and you know, when I read a book, I have to have a highlighter and a red pen, and I think it'd be easier to leave it unhighlighted because I'm highlighting everything. But really, if it weren't for the providential hand of God, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
And I guess what I've really been drawing some strength from, because, you know, when we see what you just read, I mean, we've had 2 weeks under our belt, and it's just so much that's been unraveled that was put in place that was so good. How many times would you say America had to have that providential, divine intervention, or we would have been over? Is there any way to estimate how many times?
Generally, about every 60 to 70 years, we come to a cataclysmic crisis where we have to decide whether we're going to stay a nation or whether we're going to be a different nation. And we're at that point right now. You know, I was talking even before the program started, and we talk to legislators all the time. Last night, we were conversing with several by email and text, et cetera. And one of our states, one of our prominent states in the United States, every state has curriculum for their students in the state. And every state periodically goes through and revises it. Is there anything we need to change or add?
There's state educational standards.
Educational standards, that's right. Thank you. Educational standards. And so this prominent state came back. It's been 10 years since they revised standards. And so the new standards are back from the professional educators, the educational leaders in the state that make the recommendations. And so the American History Social Studies recommendations are out. And the educators have removed completely.
Well, this is their suggested piece of legislation, implementation.
Their proposal, what their proposal is, here's what we want done. They have removed the American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Holocaust. We should not teach about any of those things any longer. Now, in the last 2 weeks, we've been with 5 different states that are going through similar efforts in their states, and some of them are pushing back harder than others. But the point is, we're trying to remake ourselves right now into something. Let's forget who we've ever been. We don't care what America is. Let's make it what we want it to be now.
Well, and that's part of the move, too, from the 1619 Project. What's interesting about the state is they didn't remove like the beginning of America because they said, no, we're just going to start with Jamestown 1619 and we're going to show how America was built by slavery, but you got to take out the American Revolution and the Civil War, which actually was a war fought helping end slavery in America. You got to take out World War I and World War II, where we actually were good guys helping other nations escape from under oppression and communist and dictator leaders and mass murderers. So we don't want to cover those things, or even the Holocaust. Why in the world would anyone propose not learning about the Holocaust? because no nation wants that to happen in their nation ever again. But part of how you make sure it doesn't happen is you learn about it. But they say we're going to start with 1619 and bring it to the present and show this view of America, that America's been really totally pure evil, done all these bad things, but also is an attack on capitalism in favor of socialism. Because one of the things the 1619 Project argues and teaches is that capitalism is what promoted slavery, or slavery is what helped build capitalism, and therefore people that are in favor of the free market, in favor of capitalism, actually are just kind of white privileged pro-slavery people, is the argument their article makes. And this is the movement that we are seeing now in education. And this, again, actually we can back up to where we started earlier in the program. This is why people have to run to that roar, because when you see those problems happening in your state, you can go, oh, God, help us, what are we going to do? Or you can go, okay, roll into my sleeves, calling everybody I know. We're calling every state elected official we know. We're getting engaged in the process.
We're going to recruit our own state elected officials, because if this guy doesn't vote right, we're going to have somebody ready to replace them next time. And if the school board goes through with this nonsense of not teaching American Revolution or whatever, we're going to have different school board members. I mean, you roll up your sleeves, you get engaged, you don't just sound off, you start making prep work, and you start making plans and preparation to get recruiting done if you need it.
And this is one of the reasons, Pastor Mark, too, you mentioned the book, The American Story. One of the reasons now, providentially, right? You talked about how God's providence is so clear in American history, and it is. Dad, you mentioned probably every 60 to 70 years there's major events. I mean, really, we really break it down to even 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. Every generation.
Every generation's had these defining moments where America could have gone under. Some were bigger than others. Civil War era, pretty big era, right? Some are definitely bigger than others, but the reality is the history of America is filled that in those moments, God raised up this remnant. And the people who knew God, it almost reminds me of the book of Daniel, the people who know their God will be strong and do great exploits, right? This is the reality in American history, is the people who knew God, who followed God's word. Every time there were problems in America, they're the ones that stood up and provided the solution that allowed America to remain. And in the midst of bad education, we get the question all the time, how do we help our kids and our grandkids, or how do I learn for myself? Because a lot of people call us and they say, okay, we never learned any of this. Help us learn this. We started this book several years ago, having no idea. Initially, it was going to be a book. We were doing research projects. We were writing articles, and we said, okay, we should just write a book about this. And the book came out right after the 1619 Project came out, is when this book is being finished. And we really do believe that it was very providential, that God was having something come out to help equip people with the answer, because we go through the history of Plymouth and Jamestown, where the argument of 1619 is that America was built on slavery and that it started 1619 in Jamestown. We actually can show the history. The first shipload of slaves that arrived in Jamestown actually became indentured servants. They then were freed. They became landowners. Many of them got married. Actually, slavery wasn't legal in Jamestown until 1651. And I'm not defending bad behavior of Jamestown, because we actually highlight in our book many things that Jamestown did wrong. They didn't have a biblical mindset as opposed to Plymouth, which absolutely tried to follow the Bible and everything they did. But the point is, when you don't know history, it's easy to be lied to. And this is where we really feel like God's allowed us to compile something that provides the truth for the antidote. Knowing the truth is what sets us free. This is something that, for everybody asking, how can I learn more? How do we know what's true? Because even if you want to get involved in school board, you want to get involved in city council, I don't really know the truth. This is a really good place to start learning some of that.
Where can they get it?
So wallbuilders.com is an easy place to go. It's I'm sure all over Christian bookstores and Amazon, but we'd prefer you go to wallbuilders.com. So wallbuilders.com is a place you can go check it out. It's called The American Story, The Beginnings. It goes from Christopher Columbus roughly to the end of slavery in America. We jump ahead a little bit just so we can kind of finish that story, especially with where the 1619 is now. We wanted to make sure we finish that story. We have part 2, maybe part 3 coming out in the next year or two. Just telling more of these providential moments and how God consistently raised up Christians. America's been a nation full of problems, like every nation in the history of the world, but America has remedied and overcome and corrected our problems faster than any other nation in the history of the world, because America had a body of Christians and believers who said, what's happening in our world is not biblical. We need to change it. And God raised them up, and they brought biblical solutions that changed the nation. That's the legacy of America.
Well, David, you said we're at one of those crisis moments. So what was it in our history that caused us to not go under and invoke the help of the Lord? What can we do so that we don't watch our nation go away?
You always have to start with educating yourself. You can't very well act beyond what you know. And so you can't counter the 1619 Project if you don't know what the truth is. And that's why we see so many giving into it right now and giving into the narratives that are created by 1619. They are really so easy. They're embarrassingly easy to knock down if you know some history. And so even in speaking to black groups, I'll often go through, Tim and I both will, a lot of the black heroes they've never heard of. So now, if you had known all these black heroes, and just take the American Revolution, we're told it was a white revolution. No, no, no. It was whites, it was blacks, it was Christians, it was Jews, it was Hispanics. Out of 76 generals Washington had, 28 of them were foreign nation people. We were a melting pot from the very beginning. And we can show you the old textbooks with all these black heroes' names in it. They're all gone today. And we say, all right, here's the heroes. If you had known these guys, would you have a different attitude toward racial tension in America? Yeah, we didn't know there was anything back there. I thought it's always been racist. You have to learn. You have to know. So the American story is a good starting place. Then you have to feel some ownership. You have to be willing to stand for the truth. This is something America has not had to do in 60 or 70 years, to stand up for the truth. It's been part of the culture. Now we're in a culture that lying comes easier than telling the truth. And lying, if you lie, you're going to be attacked less than if you tell the truth. If you tell the truth, it costs you more than lying. So you're going to have the backbone to say, all right, I now know what the truth is. I'm going to stand and defend the truth. And then you have to say, I'm going to do something. I don't know what it is. I may find one neighbor. I'm going to find a 17-year-old or 87-year-old, and I'm going to help mentor them and help them learn what they don't know. And if you can do those three things, we will change the nation.
We have so many questions coming in. I think we could go on for another hour here at least, but we probably ought to try to get to some of these. So let me ask you this one, David and Tim. This comes from Daniel on chat. He asks, what are some ways for believers to take action locally?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we've answered a little bit, and so we'll try to give a little more clarity. Certainly, finding out when local elections are. Most people, before coronavirus, didn't even know who their mayor was or if they even had a mayor, let's be honest, right? Most people have no idea, but now we've seen that in some states, governors didn't lock down the state, but mayors did. Mayors said, no, we're going to have a mask mandate, we're going to do things with businesses. And so people are now discovering there is local government. So one of the things you ought to do is find out who are your local government officials. You should get to know them. Maybe go schedule a meeting with some of the city council, find out who they are, find out how you can pray for them, get connected with them, find out where they stand. What is their worldview? Do they see things the way you see them? Because the reality is, if you have a bunch of biblically minded people who are helping in the local level, then you might not need to run for office locally because you've got a lot of great people. But if you don't know who they are, you don't know where they stand or where they don't. You ought to meet them, find out who they are, find out if they're not good people, find out when the filing deadline is, to be able to have somebody else run for that position, run for that office. You can find somebody in your church, in your Bible study, your small group, and you can get their name signed up. Actually, make sure you check with them first. I know sometimes I'd be like, I'm signing Richard Harris up for mayor. Okay, check with them first, right? Like that might not be a blessing on some level. So make sure that they are approving of it, but find out when filing deadline is. And then you can file and have somebody run. One of the things that most people are shocked to discover, you actually can just get online. You can Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever search engine you use, and you can look up in your local election, go to the last election, see how many votes the people on the school board got, the people on city council got. You will be shocked that in most of those places, it was 100, 200 votes, if even that many, that got them that position. You know that many people. So if you have people who are on the school board, who are on city council, who don't have a biblical worldview, who are not godly, who aren't freedom lovers, then maybe that's a really good place to start. So find out who your local elected officials are, go meet them, pray for them, ask if there's something you can do to help serve them and be a blessing to them. And if they don't have the right worldview, find out when filing deadline is. Look around, see who people are. And Exodus 18:21 gives us a really good idea of the kind of people we should look for. Capable men that fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Make sure they are capable or able men, because way too often we have a lot of good-hearted people who want to run for office who just don't have the abilities. And it's interesting that if you look in so many of the parables in the gospel, one of the things that's pretty consistent is when, for example, the parable of the minas, the parable of talents. After the first servant who made the most, who had the 5 or the 10, depending on if you're in Luke 19 or Matthew 25, and he came back, one of the things that Jesus, or the master says, but Jesus says in his parable, is you've been faithful in little, I will make you ruler over much. Way too often we have political officials who are elected who have never ruled over anything. They've just been involved in politics their whole life. I would much rather find somebody who's ran a private practice, had their own business, ran the car dealership, been a manager, whatever. I want to know you've been successful in the real world and you understand how personal finance works. You understand what taxes are and how that functions. I want to make sure that you are capable, but then I want to make sure you fear God, because the reality is I want people that know our rights come from God and that government doesn't get to dictate or micromanage our rights. And then after they're capable, fear God, men of truth who actually do what they say they're going to do. It's one of the things that we really respected about Donald Trump on so many levels is he kept so many promises, which is very unusual for most presidents and politicians. And then men of truth who hate covetousness, people who are not just looking to expand their name or their brand or establish a foundation for themselves, that they're going to just keep running for office and become some elected political politician forever. I want someone that is not in it for their own gain. And that, again, that's one of the things we liked about Donald Trump. He didn't take a paycheck. He was always giving his paycheck away. You want people in that category. And so if you're going to recruit somebody, recruit people from the Exodus 18:21 model.
I want to jump on that for just a minute and go to the concept that Tim was talking about with local elections. Because local is what we were talking about earlier with revivals, with American War for Independence. Local is everything. I want to give you 4 examples. If you take the city of Los Angeles, now you have California that was a lockdown state. I mean, they locked churches down like crazy. You could do a lot of other stuff, but not churches. They locked down so many things. And the mayor of L.A. was right there, one of the king lockdown guys that's out there. The mayor of L.A., now L.A. is the second largest city in the nation behind New York City. L.A., the city itself, is larger than about 42, 43 different states in the United States, just the city. So being the mayor...
As far as population.
As far as population, that's what population-wise. Being the mayor of L.A. is like being the governor in 40-some-odd states. The mayor of L.A. said he was elected with 2.9% of the vote. 2.9% of the vote. Now, let me take that another one. Fort Worth, Texas, close to where we are. There's 800,000 residents in Fort Worth, Texas. When President Obama was in Fort Worth, Texas, a city in a red state, considered a conservative city, kind of a redneck city, their school board came out and said, you know, we don't think we want to do gender-specific bathrooms or locker rooms anymore. Out of Texas, out of Fort Worth, redneck town. And President Obama said, that's a great idea. Picked it up with the Federal Department of Education, said if you get federal education dollars, you can't have gender-specific bathrooms. From kindergarten all the way through high school, you got to have male and female not exist. So you have that. And we looked at the time at that school board district and found out that that school board president who oversaw that policy received a total of 1,182 votes in the election. Now, there's 800,000 in town, and he got 1,182 votes. We looked in his district. There was an evangelical church in his district that had 3,000 adults in the church. That one church could have taken him right out of office, replaced him with somebody else. One church could have done the whole thing and saved the whole nation from going through that. Well, when that policy came down, we had a town in northwest Arkansas of about 40,000 people. And a Christian lady there said, not in my town, you're not going to do this. She said, I'm running for school board. So she ran for school board. She got elected to school board in a town of 40,000. There were a total of 35 votes cast in her election. She won not by 35 votes. There were 35 votes cast in the election. And if I go to a town in northern Iowa, this pig farmer in northern Iowa said, you ain't doing it in my school. So he ran for school board. On election day, it ended up he didn't have time to vote. And don't think that he lost by 1 vote, because that wasn't the case. He received 0 votes in the entire election. If he would voted for himself, he would be on the school board. I mean, that's the point of these local elections. There are so few involved. And as Tim said, if we say, who's the name of your mayor? A lot of people don't have a clue. Who's the president of your school board? Don't have a clue. That's what we got to find out, and that's why we have to get engaged at that level, because that is a farm team. Your local school board president may become mayor, may become the state rep, may become a state senator, may become the governor, may run for president of the United States or get appointed at some cabinet level. You have to start building a farm team, start recruiting the right people in that farm team. Long answer to a short question, but that really is the essence of what it takes.
Well, we have another question here from Rosa on Facebook on kind of the same subject, but she says, I don't think I'm called to run for office, but I believe God wants me to take a stand. What can Christians do? And before you guys answer, if I could throw this
Yes,
in.
please.
Watch last week's Truth and Liberty live cast, because we gave you a whole bunch of answers to that on what you can do at the local church with starting a culture impact team.
Yeah.
And activating your church locally. But what do you guys say about that?
Yeah, so huge. You can do things in your own community. We have a series called Constitution Alive. You can help people learn more about the Constitution, learn about the freedoms and the inalienable rights that God's given us. But even beyond that, you can go to a school board meeting and just sit in the school board meeting. And if you are a tax-paying citizen in the town, you don't have to have students in the school. You still can go because you pay taxes. That's your ticket into the school board meeting. And you can ask questions of, hey, I'm curious, do we have sex ed curriculum here? And which one do we use? And you can ask some pretty basic questions and find out where they are. And if you find some really bad answers, you now have information that you can take to the local churches, that you can take to Bible studies and small groups and fire people up to get involved. Most people don't get engaged because of lack of knowledge, right? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge is what the Bible says. Most people have no idea, and so we are seeing America literally be destroyed. It's not that hard to get involved and find out more of what's going on, but part of it really does come down to we have to help disciple people, help present truth to people, but then get engaged in the community. Show up, even if you have a small group and you say, okay, I'm gonna go once this month, you go once next month. Only go once a year is fine, but have somebody at every single school board meeting so you can find out what they're doing, what they're voting on. So if there is a problem, you can take action and get involved.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's see if we can squeeze another one in here real quick. Not to go into something too controversial, but here's one from Elaine on Facebook. Should Christians accept President Biden or still believe God is not finished with Donald Trump?
Well,
those may not be mutually exclusive,
yes.
by the way.
Yes.
Both. I mean, did Daniel accept Nebuchadnezzar? Did Joseph accept Pharaoh? Did Jesus accept Caesar? Yes. I mean, they did. And so even if you have Ahab and Jezebel, Obadiah worked as chief of staff for Ahab and Jezebel right in the middle of their bad administration and saved 100 prophets doing it. So wherever you are, you be the salt and you be the light. You do not have a cause for rebellion until there is a policy that causes you to cross God's word. Not a conservative policy. Just because he wants to raise taxes by 33%, that's not...
Or a mask mandate.
Or a mask mandate. But if you tell me, as Nancy Pelosi is doing on the floor of Congress, that you can't use a male or female pronoun, you can't use a gender pronoun on the floor of Congress, I will disobey that, because the Word of God, Jesus said, don't you remember that at the beginning God made them male and female? And 4 times in the Bible, I'm going to use pronouns regardless of what they say, because I have a biblical reason for doing that. I don't necessarily have a biblical reason for opposing mask mandates. So
even though we don't like it.
Even though we don't like it, it's not a conservative policy. Don't confuse conservatism. Conservatism is good for freedom. It's good for prosperity. But you got to get to the biblical standards, and that's what you use.
Well, we've got less than a minute now left, and I hate to jump in here. I'd love to keep going, but I'm afraid we have to. David and Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, if you want to connect with their ministry and learn more, go to wallbuilders.com, where they just have an absolute treasure trove of resources and information that will bless you and your family and equip you. And also go on the resources page of Truth and Liberty. You can find more Barton resources there. Get a copy of this book, The American Story, and you know, I tell you what, this is the time to stand up. It's not the time to shrink back. Let's all go to the roar, shall we? Let's run to the roar and let's do our part. Next week, Truth and Liberty, 6 p.m. Monday. Join us. And I want to say thank you to CTN for broadcasting this. Thank you to Andrew Womack for his leadership. And thank you to all of you for watching tonight and for our loyal supporters. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.